Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to share with you the ugly truth about your resume. Now in this video, I'm going to break down how recruiters look at your resume and more importantly, how it's perceived throughout the rest of the interviewing process. Because the recruiter is the gatekeeper, that more importantly, you have to also impress the hiring manager, because at the end of the day, the hiring manager is actually the person who is ultimately in control of your resume and where it ends up. Now, as a corporate recruiter, a career coach, and a hiring manager myself, I do know a thing or two about how resumes work their way through the process. I want to peel back the curtain a little bit on the hiring process from behind the scenes, specifically with how your resume is used and perceived inside of an organization. And I'll put a disclaimer here and say that this is primarily going to be from the perspective of a professional level job. So for the blue collar folks who are watching this video, some of this advice might be relevant, some of it might not be. It just depends on the hiring process and it depends on the company itself. But before we get too far into it, if you're interested in more videos just like this one, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future posts. And I'm also really excited to announce that one of my subscribers, Sean Mizell, has graciously donated a free copy of Resume Rocketfuel for somebody in need. If you're interested in throwing your name in the ring for that, leave a comment below on why you think you're deserving of that free copy. And I'm actually gonna allow Sean to pick somebody that he feels is most deserving. So we really appreciate your generosity, Sean. All right, so let's talk the ugly truth about your resume. Now, in general, the recruiter is gonna act like a gatekeeper for your resume. And there's three major ways that recruiters find candidates to fill these jobs. First way is through inbound applications. And essentially what an inbound is I'll publish a job on LinkedIn, Indeed, or one of the other job boards. Maybe we'll put something out on the corporate website. You as the candidate will see that job. You'll put together an application, you'll update your resume, and you'll send it over. And that's called an inbound application. The second major way that we find candidates is the recruiter kind of does the reverse. Instead of inbound, we're actually doing outbound. So the recruiter will do search strings through a variety of places, most commonly on LinkedIn, where we go out and find the right profiles and we reach out to you and say, hey, we've got a job, would you be interested? The third major way is through employer referrals or internal promotions. So we'll get an internal candidate or somebody will know of somebody and they'll submit their name. Now that's not the only way we find candidates, but those are probably the three most common ways that we find them. Here's the thing about your resume though. If you're somebody that primarily relies on inbound applications for your job search, in other words, you're primarily searching for jobs by applying to positions, and that's generally the only thing that you do, it's probably the hardest way to get hired. Because the thing is when we publish a job and there's a job description that you apply to, the resumes that we see usually are not a fit. It's literally one of these things where why don't we throw an ad out there and see what happens? I would say in my career with very difficult to fill positions, less than 5% of the jobs that I have filled have come from inbound applications. So out of 100 jobs that I might recruit, I might only find or fill 5 positions with an inbound applicant. And the main reason for that is that inbound applications are generally not a good fit. So even though I might get 100, 200, 300 applications, there might only be 2, 3, 4 applications in all of that would actually be compelling enough for me to want to pick up a phone and call them. And even then, they're generally not the perfect fit. So how it works behind the scenes when a new rec comes into play is a hiring manager has this job that they publish or that they want to publish, and then we sit down with them and we do what's called an intake call, and we go through a realistic job preview. So we literally sit down with the hiring manager and say, what is it that you're looking for in this position? What are the criteria? What will this person be doing? What are the must-haves? And what would the ideal candidate profile look like? So we basically create a profile that we go out and recruit against. Inbound applications generally don't match the ideal candidate profile very closely. I'm not saying they never do, but in general, they don't. When we get an inbound application that's a pretty close fit, it's actually a pretty exciting thing because we don't usually see that very often. More frequently, we're going and doing our own outreach and we're setting up search parameters based on specific keywords and specific criteria based on our conversation with the hiring manager. So we're going out and reaching out to the candidates we feel would be a good fit because it's generally a higher rate of return. So again, if you're somebody that is mainly looking for jobs by applying to open positions, the chances of you actually getting hired through that are actually pretty slim. It doesn't mean that you can't ever get hired. And I know there's a lot of people out there who have found jobs that way, but statistically speaking, you have a much better chance of getting a recruiter to come and find you for a perfect fit rather than you being the perfect fit for my job. And I guarantee you there'll be some people in the comment section that will say, recruiters don't know how to screen resumes. They don't know what they're looking for, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact of the matter is a good corporate recruiter, and I'm talking about an internal corporate recruiter that actually works for the company and not a headhunter. I want to clarify that. But a good corporate recruiter knows exactly what they're looking for, and they know the profiles very well because they have meetings regularly with the hiring managers, and they present candidates to the hiring managers, go through interviewing processes. And if the hiring manager doesn't like something about a particular profile, they do a calibration. So the recruiter looks at it and says, if we're continuing to get people rejected for this reason, and this reason, then we need to adjust our search string. We need to adjust how we screen the candidates so that we can get the hiring manager a closer fit. In some cases, we may go back to the hiring manager and say, hey, listen, you're being a little bit too selective. This is the reality of the market. And there's kind of an influencing thing that goes on, at least with good recruiters. They should be influencing their hiring managers. But in general, they're usually very well aligned to what the hiring manager is looking for. But to just say, recruiters don't know what they're looking for, it's simply not true. Probably is more likely that you presented a resume that just wasn't a good fit for that particular hiring manager. It's nothing personal. There's no reason to get upset about it. But if you're finding that you're getting your resume rejected from your inbound applications very frequently, it's likely that you're not targeting the right profile for what the hiring manager is looking for. So I will stress this, like I've stressed in a lot of my other videos about this, is customization is absolutely the key. You have to make sure that you're as close a fit to the job that you're applying to or what the hiring manager is looking for. So that's the first thing, that a vast majority of resumes that get submitted are not considered because they're just not good fits. So if you're applying to jobs, that's probably the least effective way to get a new opportunity. But if you are somebody that's submitting your resume and you're trying to figure out how to get through that process, I will say this, length does matter. If you're somebody that's submitting a 5, 6, 7 page resume, you're actually hurting your chances of getting noticed. And what I mean by that is, if we're looking for very specific things as a recruiting team, we're looking for very specific competencies, and you put those competencies in, but you put every other thing that you've ever accomplished in your career, and you have very wordy resume that's several pages long. I know a lot of people think, well, if I put everything in there, the hiring team's going to see, it's kind of like a catch-all. If I put everything in there, they'll see that I've done this, they've done this, and I've done this, and surely that should check some box. But it actually is counterintuitive. It actually makes it harder for us to find what we're looking for when you load your resume down with everything that you've ever accomplished. Length does matter, and shorter is better than long. In fact, most cases, you should be able to fit a 15 to 20 year career into 2 pages. Now, some people say you should have a 1-page resume, and I don't really care about that. 2 pages is fine. It doesn't take me much to scroll through a second page. The advice really is more designed to keep things as concise as possible and as targeted as possible, because otherwise we're not going to find what we're looking for. And frankly, I'm not going to take the time to go through 8 pages or 9 pages of a resume. In fact, the longest one that I think I've ever gotten was like a 20-page resume, and it was just like page after page after page. And I'm sitting there looking at this going, I don't have time to read through every one of these when I've got 200 other applications. I've got 15 or 20 jobs that I'm recruiting, and I'm trying to get candidate flow for each one of those. So if you make it extra wordy, the chances of you actually getting a phone call are very slim unless the recruiter is essentially desperate for candidate flow and they're just trying to grasp at straws. There have been times where I'll see something on a resume that I'm like, it's a little bit of a stretch. Maybe I'll call them and just kind of flush it out, but that's really more of an exploratory call where you have to convince me that you're the right fit versus me being excited about your profile. And in almost every case, it's going to be those long resumes. So please, if you are somebody that is very particular about your resume and you're really proud about all the things that you've accomplished, I strongly encourage you to consider shortening it down to 2 pages. Just try it and see if it works. The next ugly truth is that bad resumes don't get read. So if you have a bad resume, a long resume, a resume with spelling or grammatical errors, a resume that has a bunch of graphics and weird, funky things going on in it, and it's really obnoxious and bright and blah, blah, blah. We just like simple. Unless you're going for a creative job, in which case you can probably get more creative. In fact, we would probably expect you to be more creative on it. But in general, for most positions, keep it simple and easy to read. Make your columns and your paragraphs nice and clean. Make your bullet points nice and short. You don't go 3, 4, 5 lines on bullet points. Keep it to two lines tops. Keep everything very readable. Make sure that we know how to contact you. I've seen some people have actually had resumes that they didn't leave contact information on. And some people leave resumes that I don't even know what location they're in. And even if it's a remote job, we still need to know what location you're in, because there are certain places we still can't hire from, even if it's remote. So make it easy for the recruiter to come and find you and figure out what it is that they need out of your resume. So bad resumes recruiters just won't go through the effort to try to figure it out when they've got a lot of other options and people who are delivering resumes that do have that stuff. Make it easy for the recruiter, and you're gonna have a better chance at getting into that interview process and ultimately to land that job. And one of the last ugly truths that I want to cover is that job titles are probably the most important thing that we pay attention to when we are screening resumes. If your job titles do not match what we are looking for in the job that we're recruiting for, the chances of you getting a phone call are very slim. So if you have a very proprietary title, I would encourage you to consider trying to change it to a little bit more generic so that it's more commonly accepted. Now, that doesn't mean that you should lie on your resume and change titles to do something that you simply haven't done. But let me give you an example. At a company I used to work for, and we recruited, we had in engineering in a manufacturing facility, there was these production engineers. Essentially, what they would do is they would look for production errors in the production runs. So if the machines, these massive machines would break down, their job was to figure out what went wrong, get it back up and running as quickly as possible so that there was the least amount of scrap, etc. They were called run-to-run engineers in this particular organization. In a very small industry, sub-industry that this was part of, that might have been a somewhat common title, but in the broader manufacturing industry, nobody knew what run-to-run engineer was. So I would encourage that person who is in a run-to-run engineering capacity to change their title to production engineer, because that's exactly what it is. It's production engineer. They just happen to call it run-to-run at this specific company. That's not necessarily lying on your resume. It's just making your title a little bit more generic, a little bit more digestible, and a little bit, most importantly, a little bit more discoverable. So when that recruiter is scanning your resume in 5 seconds, you're gonna have a much better chance at stopping their eye when they see the right kinds of titles or similar titles to what they're recruiting for. So titles absolutely do make probably the biggest difference in getting a recruiter to at least stop on your resume and start scanning it more deeply. In general, you gotta remember that your resume is the first impression that you're gonna make on the hiring team. So you wanna make sure that it's nice and tight and well organized, well thought out, and very concise. But if you find that you're applying to a bunch of jobs and all you're getting is rejections, I would encourage you to check out my course, Resume Rocketfuel. It's gonna get people like me, the recruiter, to stop on you and then ultimately pick up a phone to call you for the first round interview. And then once you get that first round interview, it's up to you to sell yourself throughout the rest of the interviewing process. That's where the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp comes in. And it's going to teach you how to go through each step of that interviewing process. Essentially, it's interview training. But what I referred to earlier in the video, having a recruiter come and find you, and even better, skipping the recruiter altogether and moving right into the hiring process with the hiring manager, you can do that through some techniques that I teach in my Unlocking LinkedIn course. So if you're somebody that's struggling and you want the easier route to getting into the interview process and land that job, I highly encourage you to check that one out as well. So hopefully this demystifies how your resume is perceived by the organizations that you're applying to. Use some strategy, adjust what you're doing, and you should have a better success rate in getting that interview. Appreciate you watching. If you found any value in this video, sure would appreciate a thumbs up. It takes me 2 or 3 days to produce these. It only takes you a second to hit that like button, and it really does help support the growth of the channel and allows me to continue to bring this content. We'll see you on the next one.